My name is Leonard Hale. I turned 78 in January. Some people recognize the name. They say they've heard my voice before, weeks back. That surprises me more than it should. I never expected anyone to listen closely to an old man with nothing urgent to offer. There's something I avoided saying then. Not because it was dramatic, only because it sat too quietly in me. It has a way of changing how you see things once you finally let it surface. I was married to Margaret for 43 years, long enough that our life together felt permanent, like furniture, like walls, like the way the light always landed on the floor in the late afternoon. For most of those years, I believed we were fine, not passionate, not fragile, just steady. The kind of marriage people describe as successful when they don't know what else to call it. There's a strange truth about long companionships. You can share decades with someone and still never quite touch the part of them that matters most. You can memorize their routines, their preferences, their habits, and remain unfamiliar with their inner weather. Margaret died 5 years ago. Lung disease, slow, quiet. The kind of illness that doesn't arrive all at once, but erodes the days gently, almost politely. One season, she was walking the neighborhood each morning. By winter, she was watching it through the glass. During her last weeks, when the house felt larger than it ever had, she said something to me while the ceiling fan moved the air in small, patient circles. We spent too much time trying to be reasonable, she said. We forgot how to stay close. I remember staring at the window when she said it. The screen was loose in one corner. It made a faint tapping sound whenever the breeze shifted. I didn't understand her then. I thought of all the years we'd stayed faithful, how rarely we'd argued, how carefully we'd built our life. That, I believed, had been the point. But comfort, I would learn later, is not the same thing as intimacy. They resemble each other only from a distance. Margaret used to bring me small ideas, never demands, just offerings. A community photography class, an outdoor concert by the river, an evening walk after dinner instead of separate rooms. Sometimes she would pause in the doorway of my study and say lightly, "Do you want to sit with me for a while?" I nearly always had an answer ready. Too tired, not tonight, maybe this weekend. We'll have time. It never felt cruel when I said it. It felt practical, responsible, like the kind of response a sensible man gives when nothing appears urgent. I assumed the important things were covered. We paid the bills, we shared meals, we slept side by side. I showed up when something broke. I stayed. It took me years to realize that I was confusing presence with attention. The small rituals began to disappear without announcement. The longer conversations, the casual touching as we passed in the hallway, the way she once used to tell stories with unnecessary detail just because she enjoyed being heard. Nothing collapsed, it all simply thinned. Gradually, so gradually, I adjusted to the quiet the way people adjust to background noise. Margaret stopped asking after a while. She filled her days elsewhere, gardening, phone calls with friends, long afternoons by the radio with a blanket across her knees. We became courteous inhabitants of the same space. Two people who knew how the other took their tea, but not what they were still hoping for. We moved through the same rooms with practiced courtesy. We shared the same table, the same hallway, the same bed. But somewhere along the way, we stopped sharing ourselves. I told myself this was what endurance looked like. That long marriages were supposed to soften, quiet down, become efficient. I believed it was maturity. That this thinning of feeling was simply what happened when people stayed too long in the same life. Margaret's illness disrupted that illusion. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to unsettle the rhythm. Suddenly, the future felt shorter, not in a way anyone announced, just in the way the calendar began to look different. During those months, the house felt slower. Afternoons stretched. The kitchen stayed untouched longer. We sat more. We spoke more. And in that new stillness, things began to surface. She told me about moments I had forgotten entirely. Things I had brushed past without noticing. Conversations she had waited for that never arrived. Evenings she spent listening for my footsteps in the hall that never came. She spoke without bitterness. That was the part that unsettled me most. One evening, when the air felt heavy and the lamp beside her chair buzzed faintly, she told me about a place she had carried quietly for years. A small town along the coast of Portugal. White buildings, blue shutters, narrow streets that smelled like bread in the mornings. Her grandfather had lived there as a child. She'd grown up hearing stories, had once cut out photographs from magazines and tucked them between the pages of books. She had mentioned it to me before. I know she had. I just never treated it as real. I had always responded with the same careful phrases. Not this year. It's complicated. Let's wait until things settle. They never settled. When she spoke about it that night, she wasn't angry. She didn't accuse. She didn't even sound disappointed in the way people usually do. She sounded finished with it, as if she had already folded the dream away years ago. I asked her why she never pressed me harder, why she didn't insist. She looked at the window for a moment. The glass needed cleaning. The street light outside flickered the way it always had. I didn't want to drag you somewhere your heart never went, she said. I wanted you to want to be there with me. There was nothing sharp in her voice, no drama, just the plain weight of something that had been carried too long. And I understood then that I had never refused the trip. I had refused the effort of wanting. Later, after the house had emptied again, after the rooms returned to their quieter version of silence, I found the notebook she used to keep in the drawer beside her bed. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't locked. I just had never looked. The pages were full of ordinary things, lists, weather, notes about the neighbors. But threaded through it were other lines, smaller handwriting, hesitant sentences, loneliness, the peculiar ache of speaking into rooms that didn't answer, the strange feeling of sitting beside someone for years and still feeling unseen. Reading it felt like discovering a second life that had existed quietly beside my own, one I had never learned how to enter. In the notebook, she mentioned moments so small they almost embarrassed me to recognize. The evenings I nodded without listening. The times she paused mid-sentence because I was scrolling. The mornings I left early without noticing she was already awake. She wrote about those moments the way some people write about weather, calmly, without accusation, just recording that they had happened. She also wrote about the man she married, not the one I became, the earlier one, the one who used to linger in doorways just to keep conversations going, the one who once remembered stories she had told only once. Sometimes she wrote that she waited for that version of me to return. Other times, she admitted she no longer knew how to reach me. The strange thing is, I was never far away. We slept under the same roof, the same sheets. Our shoes remained side by side near the door. The house still functioned like a shared life. But closeness is not measured by distance. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't unfaithful. I didn't shout. I didn't disappear. I simply drifted into ease, into habit, into the assumption that nothing required tending because nothing had broken. I confused consistency with care. What ended us was not catastrophe. It was accumulation. Not one sharp wound, but thousands of shallow ones that never quite healed because they were never acknowledged. There were questions I never asked anymore, stories I stopped inviting, silences I allowed to stretch because filling them felt unnecessary. It didn't feel like neglect while it was happening. It felt like routine. There is a difference between living beside someone and living with them. I learned that too late to change the way it mattered. The years don't offer revisions. They only review drafts you didn't realize you were writing. When Margaret was gone, people said kind things. They said I had been dependable, steady, a good husband. They meant comfort by it. I accepted the words politely, but they didn't sit right. Dependable is not the same as present. Steady is not the same as attentive. Adequate is not the same as loving. I had done nothing wrong in any obvious way, and somehow that was the problem. I did not show up in the ways that counted. That understanding stays with me now, the way certain aches do. Quiet, persistent, never dramatic enough to mention, never absent enough to forget. 5 winters have passed since Margaret died, and still there are places my mind returns to without invitation. Not to moments of crisis, to smaller rooms. A folded brochure she once left on the counter. A half-finished crossword she abandoned when I didn't answer. The soft knock on my study door that I pretended not to hear because I was almost done. There were things she wanted to share with me. Not important things, not impressive things, just time. I think about the evening she suggested we take a class at the community center. Painting, baking, something ordinary. I think about the way she lingered in the doorway when I worked late. I think about how many times I said, maybe next week. Next week did not arrive. The house is quieter now, but not in the way people expect. It is not silence that fills the rooms. It is absence shaped like routine. Some afternoons I sit at the small table by the window, The light reaches the floorboards differently than it used to. The kettle hums. The clock hesitates between seconds. Dust moves slowly through the air when the radiator turns on. There are still photographs in drawers, receipts tucked between pages of old books. Her handwriting in the margins of recipes we never finished trying. None of it accuses me. That's the hardest part. On the corner of my desk, I keep one photograph framed in thin wood. It was taken early, before we learned how to manage each other. She is standing on a beach I no longer remember by name. Wind in her hair, one hand lifted to shield her eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. It is not the woman she became. It is the woman she trusted I would remain alongside. Some days I study that picture longer than I intend to, not searching for guilt, not searching for meaning, just looking. And occasionally, in the late afternoon when the room turns amber and the world feels briefly unfinished, I find myself wondering something simple. Not how to undo it, not how to repair it, only this. How many moments pass through our hands without weight, until there are none left to hold?